I never believed in ghosts until I spent 3 nights in that hostel near Hongdae. My name is Min Jae, and what happened to me in room 304 still makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. I was 26, fresh out of university, and completely broke from months of job hunting. The only accommodation I could afford was this rundown backpacker hostel tucked between a convenience store and a nori bang in one of Seoul's older neighborhoods. The place looked decent enough from the outside, but the moment I walked through those glass doors, something felt off. The lobby was too quiet for a Friday evening, with just the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of old floorboards. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, barely looked up when I handed over my passport. She just slid me a key card and muttered the room number under her breath. Room 304 was on the 3rd floor, down a narrow hallway that seemed to stretch longer than it should. The carpet was worn thin in places, and the walls had that institutional beige color that made everything feel sterile and unwelcoming. When I opened the door, I was hit with the smell of disinfectant mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify. Something stale and musty, like air that had been trapped for too long. The room housed 8 bunk beds arranged in 2 rows, but only 3 other beds seemed occupied. Personal belongings were scattered on a few of the lower bunks, backpacks and clothes draped over the metal frames. My assigned bed was number 7, a top bunk near the far window. The metal ladder felt cold under my hands as I climbed up to check out my space for the next few nights. The bed came with a thin privacy curtain that you could pull around the entire bunk, creating a small cocoon of personal space. I set up my few belongings and tried to get comfortable, but the mattress was lumpy and the pillow smelled like it had been used by dozens of travelers before me. Outside the window, I could see the neon signs of the district casting colored shadows across the buildings, but the view did little to improve the atmosphere. What struck me most was how quiet my roommates were. In all the hostels I'd stayed at during my university years, there was always some noise. People coming and going, conversations in different languages, the rustle of plastic bags, someone typing on their laptop. But room 304 was eerily silent. I could hear the faint breathing of someone in the bunk below mine, but that was it. No movement, no whispered phone calls, no shuffling around to get comfortable. The first night passed without incident, though I didn't sleep well. The fluorescent light in the hallway outside kept flickering, sending irregular flashes of brightness under our door. Every time I was about to drift off, that stuttering light would pull me back to consciousness. I told myself it was just old wiring in an old building, but it felt deliberate somehow, like someone was playing with the switch. During the day, I was out job hunting and exploring the city, trying to make the most of my limited budget. When I returned each evening, the room maintained that same unsettling quiet. I began to notice small details that hadn't registered before, the way the metal bed frames would creak at odd moments when no one was moving, how the temperature in certain spots of the room felt noticeably colder than others, the fact that I never actually saw any of my roommates face to face, even though their belongings suggested they were staying there. On my second night, I woke up around 3 in the morning with the distinct feeling that someone was watching me. My curtain was pulled closed, creating a small dark space around my bed, but I could sense a presence nearby. I lay perfectly still, listening carefully for any sound that might explain what had woken me. The room was silent, except for that same soft breathing from below, but now it seemed more labored, more deliberate. I was about to dismiss it as paranoia when I heard something that made my blood run cold. The soft metallic clink of someone climbing the ladder to my bunk, step by step, Rung by rung, someone was making their way up to my level, but that was impossible. The bed below mine was occupied, and there was no reason for anyone to climb up to my bunk in the middle of the night. The climbing stopped, and I held my breath, waiting. Then slowly, I saw a pale hand grip the edge of my curtain from the outside. The fabric moved slightly, just enough to create a small gap, and through that gap I saw a face. It was the face of a child. I wanted to scream, to move, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only lie there, paralyzed, as this stared at me through the gap in my curtain. The face didn't move, didn't blink, didn't show any emotion. It just watched me with those unnaturally large eyes, as if studying me or waiting for something. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The child's face remained perfectly still, never breaking eye contact. I could feel sweat beating on my forehead, despite the cold air in the room. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain everyone in the room could hear it, but the silence continued unbroken. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the face vanished. I heard the soft metallic sounds of someone climbing back down the ladder, but this time the steps seemed to fade away rather than reach the floor. When I finally found the courage to peek through my curtain, the area around my bunk was empty. The next morning, I asked the receptionist about the history of the building, trying to sound casual despite my shaking hands. What she told me explained everything and made it so much worse. The hostel had been built in the 1990s on the site of an old underground shelter that dated back to the Korean War. During the construction, they'd found evidence of families who had taken refuge there during the bombing raids, including several children who had never made it out. One of the children, she explained with uncomfortable hesitation, had been found still clutching a small blanket near what was now the third floor. A girl, maybe 8 years old, who had been separated from her family during the chaos. The workers had given her a proper burial, but strange incidents had been reported ever since the hostel opened. Guests on the third floor, specifically in room 304, would complain about feeling watched at night or seeing small handprints on the windows that would disappear by morning. I wanted to change rooms immediately, but the hostel was fully booked for the weekend. The receptionist offered to put me on a waiting list, but something in her expression told me she'd heard this request before, too many times. I spent the rest of that day wandering Seoul, trying to process what I'd experienced and what I'd learned. Part of me hoped that knowing the truth would make it less frightening, that understanding the source would somehow diminish the terror. But as evening approached and I had to return to room 304, that hope evaporated completely. If anything, knowing made it worse. This wasn't just my imagination or stress from job hunting. Something was actually there, something that had been there for decades, watching guests from behind those thin curtains. My third and final night was when everything reached its peak. I decided to stay awake, to face whatever was happening rather than be caught off guard again. I lay in my bunk with the curtain partially open, staring at the ceiling and listening to every small sound in the room. The fluorescent light in the hallway continued its irregular flickering, casting shifting shadows across the walls. Around 2 a.m, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. My breath became visible in small puffs, and I could feel the cold seeping through my blanket. The breathing from the bunk below mine stopped completely, as if whoever was down there was holding their breath or had simply ceased to exist. Then I heard it again, the soft metallic clink of the ladder, but this time it was different, slower, more deliberate, and accompanied by a sound I hadn't noticed before, a soft dragging noise, like fabric being pulled along the metal rungs. The climbing continued, step by step, until I knew someone was at the level of my bunk. This time, I was ready. I turned my head toward the edge of my bed and saw the same pale hand gripping the curtain, but now I could see more details that made my stomach turn. The fingers were too thin, almost skeletal, and there were dark marks around the wrist that looked like old bruises or rope burns. The curtain moved aside. And the child's face appeared again. but tonight, I could see the full extent of what I was looking at. The pale girl wore what appeared to be the remnants of old clothing, torn and stained with something dark. Her hair was matted and hung in uneven strands around her face. Those unnaturally large eyes held a sadness so profound it seemed to fill the entire room. She didn't just stare this time, her mouth opened slightly as if she was trying to speak, but no sound came out, only a small puff of cold air that I could see in the frigid temperature of the room. Her lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't understand, repeating the same phrase over and over again. I found myself leaning closer, trying to read her lips, when suddenly her expression changed. The sadness transformed into something more urgent, more desperate. Her eyes widened even further, and she began shaking her head frantically. Her silent words became more animated, more insistent, as if she was trying to warn me about something. That's when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside our room, but these weren't the soft steps of another hostel guest. These were heavy, deliberate, accompanied by a scraping sound like something being dragged along the floor. The footsteps stopped directly outside our door, and I could see the shadow of feet blocking the light that came from under the gap. The pale girl's expression became even more frantic. She pointed toward the door, then back at me, her mouth moving rapidly in silent communication. Whatever was outside the door, she didn't want it to find me. She was trying to protect me from something worse than herself. The door handle began to turn slowly, and I realized with horror that I had forgotten to lock it. The girl's eyes met mine one final time, and in that moment, I understood what she'd been trying to tell me. She mouthed the words clearly now, and I could read her lips perfectly. Hide. I pulled my blanket over my head and pressed myself as flat as possible against the mattress. Through the thin fabric, I could hear the door open with a soft creak. The footsteps entered the room, heavier now, moving between the bunks. The dragging sound continued, scraping against the floor with each step. Minutes passed in absolute terror. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. Eventually, the footsteps retreated, the door closed, and the hallway fell silent again. When I finally found the courage to lower my blanket, the girl was gone. I left the next morning without saying goodbye to anyone, catching the first bus out of that neighborhood. But sometimes, late at night in my own apartment, I still think about that pale girl and wonder if she's still there, still trying to protect other travelers from whatever walks those hallways after midnight. The hostel is still operating, still taking bookings for room 304, and sometimes, when I'm scrolling through travel websites, I see reviews that mention strange dreams or feeling watched while sleeping. But no one ever talks about the girl who tries to keep them safe. The child who never made it out of that shelter all those years ago, still standing guard in the darkness between worlds.